The perfect jeweler. Charaka clearly has created universal outline for the diagnosis of insanity as it is displayed as well in PTSD. In his concept of Unmada or insanity, there are detailed descriptions of the different causative factors. Insanity Unmada as a result of psychological trauma, though he states, is to be treated differently to the diseases described in Kaya Chikitsa or Shalakya Tantra. He had clearly defined a psychological approach in understanding the various shatters of the patient's memories. Peter Levine says, perhaps nowhere in the field of trauma is there more confusion than with the role of traumatic memory in both pathology and healing. Indeed, research studies conducted by different laboratories frequently appear to contradict each other. In addition, clinicians and academics rarely communicate with each other, a very unfortunate state of affairs. Most importantly, traumatic memory, creating potential for great confusion and misapplication of therapeutic techniques. He said that in 2015 in his book. Charaka has given not only explanations and descriptions of symptoms, but outlined treatment guidelines as well. He emphasizes on the best and special education of the therapist. Ayurveda therefore offers, through the ancient knowledge of Charaka, a complete compendium of applicable techniques, empirical knowledge, and explicit herbal and physical therapies. Different to Western approaches, but the patient has to fit in the treatment methods. Ayurveda offers a treatment approach that validates the individual constitution, the experiences, the nutrition, the lifestyle, and the abilities of the patient, and then tailors a perfect treatment plan which incorporates meaning-making and universal approaches. The restoration of the patient's inner landscape, rather than suppressing symptoms or treating the symptoms that are the result of adaptation to the sad and unwanted fixation of memory, are possible with proper knowledge of diagnose, treatment plans, and proper application of the treatments. The whole concept delivers hundreds of treatment options that can re-establish the patient's connectedness to the world, release unwanted PTS symptoms, and prevent further and possible future damage through self-inquiry. This, of course, does not include natural disasters, criminal acts, and diseases. Charaka has a holistic approach. As it is said, the perfect jeweler is making the jewelry according to the stone, and not the stone according to the jewelry. From Sunil Agarwal, a good friend in Rishikesh, 2010. Holistic approaches embed the patient in a perfect way of support and hold without changing them substantially. The patient will not be adapted. They will be honored. The treatments will offer a safe space and introduce changes in the environment if necessary. Nutrition and lifestyle, ahara vihara, are crucial parts in the path of recovery. Unlike psychological Western approaches which focus merely on the mind, there is no healing possible if the nutrition and the lifestyle are not adequate to the patient's inner needs. Considering those factors like environment, social and intimate relations, nutrition, exercise, self-care, the seasons, the weather, health and age, and using this knowledge of change, transformation and adaptation is helpful for the patient to discover and rediscover and re-establish connection as well as disconnection. Positive feelings like safety, tenderness, care, positive receptive touch, pain reduction, etc. during treatment are most likely to convince the patient through own experience of connection, recovery and healing. I will be now reading from my own experiences at my Clinic Society of Friends in Berlin and presenting my research, the stages of traumatic injuries and PTSD, translated into Ayurveda concepts of the three doshas, ama and the gunas. It is a research on the treatment of traumatic injuries, resilience and recovery conducted over the last 30 years. At Society of Friends Berlin, Data on the treatment options was collected through the enormous compliance of the patients. They were all helpful after they experienced a reduction of their symptoms on PTSD or when they were able to tackle their drug addiction or sleeplessness. As healing is a very complex, multifactorial assumption, Society of Friends Berlin focused instead on an increase of resilience, recovery, and increase of stable self-care moments. Key factors for resilience and recovery. According to our findings during our experimental beginning years, the recovery and/or emotional survival after traumatic injury, or a series of them, seems to be relying on several key factors. The previous traumatic experiences, previous positive experiences of family bonds, care, support, financial security, and health of the individual. The individual's personal stamina, age, health, chronic illnesses, etc., as well as negative cofactors during the event of trauma, like being eyewitness of other people being traumatized, like a helper, long-term duration of the trauma, options to escape or not to escape, kept hostage, armor, options or no options for self-defense, or no help at all. Other factors were positive aftercare or negative aftercare, factors like psychological help provided immediately, later, or no. The financial situation, support, stable, unstable. The physical damage that might be still persisting. Financial damage through or as a result of the traumatizing event, loss of relatives, friends, community during the event or after, or positive family support, or the restoration of a safe place. If the person was alone during the event, they experience the situation differently than having to protect minors, friends or relatives at the traumatic event, the attack or threat. Being in a sheltered surrounding after the distress, preferably with understanding support, is a different setting and better start for recovery than experiencing illness or even injury and disability due to the event, or being financially in an unsecure position. A key factor on the narrow road of either recovery from PTSD or a life in a constant distress suffering from PTSD, though, seems to be the aftercare. The constant recall of remembrance of the event in psychotherapy, and in particular in trauma psychotherapy groups, definitely plays a key role in not getting out of traumatic memory. Some victims had reported that they actually stopped the previous psychological therapy because they needed time out from the devastating memories that they were brought up again and again in the setting. Group therapy, in particular, seemed to be a higher risk factor for arousal to happen, and often additional new memories of the event were generated. A survivor of the Berlin Christmas market attack in 2016 stated, "During the group sessions, we were exposed to more details that we as individuals even had noticed. She was hit by falling construction panels and could not remember how she happened to find herself on a completely different spot when she tried to get up." The shared stories of other survivors, though during group sittings, added more horror to her memory. She said, "In the end, it was hard to find out which one is your own memory." There has been new research provided in order to understand memory and even how to create false memories. Shaw writes in her book, The Memory Illusion, Remembering, Forgetting, and the Science of False Memory by Dr. Julia Shaw, "If you are like most people, you probably believe that trauma memories are special, but your understanding of these trauma memories is probably self-contradictory. You believe that on the one hand, we often forget or repress incredibly emotional events, but on the other, that we can have nightmares and flashbacks to them. If this is true, then you probably believe that our memories of traumatic events are simultaneously worse and better than non-emotional memories. But which is it? Therapists and scientists have to rethink the methods of treating patients with PTSD and by understanding neuroscience of memories and how memories are created and stored. By understanding the function of memory, ideally, the victim's memory can be released, rewritten, and the patient could start focusing on the here and now. The key to the locked memory data. Memory is never the exact replica of the event, but most likely an adaptation according to the victim's personality and their way to deal with the impact and the emotions during and after the event. It is important to note that these explanations are not given to question the victim. Whatever the victim reports is what they truly remember, which, however, might not be what actually happened. This is not to be mistaken as an excuse to mistrust the victim of rape, assault, or other terror. It is about not to create more and false memories, deny the memory by confusing the victim with manipulating questions. Julia Shaw developed very clear guidelines how to ask the victim in order not to manipulate the memory. Therefore, asking questions about some details might be highly manipulative at the police station or even at court, as the memory of two people already differ. The question that arose at Society of Friends Berlin was, is there, besides narrative repetitive talking about the event, another way to recovery? In the daily therapeutic practice, the patients we saw learning how to overcome the horrifying memories. Could Ayurveda and yoga be a way out of the memory trap and create a new pattern to deal with future upsetting and stressful events by meaning making, structuring life, and providing techniques to calm the mind and settle emotions? Ayurveda, discovering the individual symptoms of the patient. In order to provide the optimized treatment, precise and multidimensional diagnosis is essential. At Society of Friends Berlin, not only Ayurvedic diagnosis systems have been used, but biomedical laboratory exams and a close network to biomedical physicians as well. Laboratories and previous medical records, often of the last years, together with a holistic view on emotional influences, understanding diet and lifestyle of the patient, their personal needs and abilities, their narratives, created a foundation of a complex and detailed examination. Measuring blood pressure, pulse frequency, ordering X-rays was standard in order to study the overlapping findings of Ayurveda and the biomedical medicine, but to give the patient maximum security. Jumping to a conclusion by only one symptom is always wrong. As Western diagnosis simplifies varieties of symptoms to one diagnosis like PTSD, Ayurveda provides a very detailed symptomatic diagnosis on various observation points. The patients therefore get treated according to their displayed symptoms and according to a diagnosis that covers a range of possible symptoms. Discovering the individual symptoms of the patient in order to tailor the treatment specifically is one of the strengths of Ayurveda. This chapter now I'm reading displays the research done at Society of Friends and Traumatized Patients according to the symptoms. The symptoms have been categorized according to classical Ayurvedic diagnosis patterns in order to develop a tool under which patients can be treated more efficiently and in order to avoid wrong treatment approaches. This is my very own work I'm presenting here. The own research at Society of Friends led to the following guidelines that have been approved in hundreds of treatments over a period of 40 years of my work. The categories are the result of intense studies with trial and error, literally, learning by doing. In order to create a more efficient way to understand patients with a possible traumatic history, the following guidelines represent the research. Victims of trauma might be living for days, years, or a lifetime in the first stage of PTS or PTSD, depending on their previous experiences, the setting, the situation, and how quickly a safe space was restored. Some of the patients, as well those who already have a dominance in those doshas, are depending on a particular trauma as well as other unknown factors, might enter the second stage tightrope. The first two stages are mostly the time when the person reaches out for treatment as the effects of the trauma are felt as interfering with life. The third stage is a more comfortable one as the patient does not reflect on trauma or unpleasant emotions. However, the experienced numbness or detachment often brings relatives, friends and partners into play who force the patient now to seek help. The fourth stage, however, is a stage where we normally do not see the patients anymore in the clinic, as the decompensation of mental coping mechanisms have led to changes in the personality that might not be reversible. The stage patterns is following the Western terms according to Peter Levine's trauma stages and can be described as stage 1, fight or flight, or in Ayurvedic terms, Vata Pitta. Stage 2, tightrope, high tension, Pitta Vata. Stage 3, dissociation and denial, Kapha. Stage 4, helplessness and immobility, Kapha, Tamas. All the stages are not completely fixed parameters, but fluid lines within the mind and reaction of the victim is oscillating. Nothing in life is a fixed state. Everything circulates, spirals, is in transition. The same is true for the doshas and gunas, of course, as they are representing Ayurveda as the science of which what ends. We all are constantly changing our inner landscape according to the dosha's flow. As these stages in the thesis are representing only experience based on ideas and ideas based on experiences as work tools from the clinic, they definitely need more testing by other therapists until they can be taken as a final definition. Stage 1, the Vata-dominated fight or flight mode. During the traumatizing event, the decision has to be made quickly. Can I fight the situation or could I escape? If neither is possible due to prolonged exposure, overwhelming power of the aggressor, or the situation and place the victim is caught in, like natural disaster, war, domestic violence, etc., the victim might remain in stage 1 or move on to stage 2, where the dominating emotion is a constant, aggressive, self-defensive manner. In the clinical practice of Society of Friends, mostly patients with symptoms of stage 1 and 2 were seen. In stage 1, the victim is constantly trying to figure out if there is danger ahead through catastrophic thinking. There is no focusing possible in thoughts, actions, etc., because the alert system reaches out in all directions at all times. The mind is shattered and scattered. Concentration, learning, and therefore remembering are impaired. The breathing appears shallow, but the heartbeat rates can rise or drop quickly. Sleeping is difficult to the extreme alertness of sensual activity. Mental rest or meditation cannot be achieved as long as the patient feels constantly like being on the run. A broken continuity of life important factors is one of the dominating signs. A lot of projects, including healing projects, are started but then left far too early. A new project will be around the corner. The financial situation is often disastrous, as attaining regular work is a problem. Nothing gets finished. Loneliness, distrust, lack of faith characterizes the patient. Unsteadiness and broken promises let other people avoid the trauma patient in a Vata state. Stage 2, the tightrope or the high tension phase of Pitta Vata. Stage 2 is barely a Pitta dominated stage, however Vata could still be involved. Stage 2 is characterized by hypotension, like a tightrope pulled strongly from both sides. Mind and body are in a constant hyper-alert state of self-defense. The person appears opinionated, self-righteous, goes for self-justice as well as self-justification. The patient seemed to be unable to pay respect or give space to others or take criticism. Narcissistic behavior can isolate them even from their loved ones. Aggressive behavior, intolerance, irritability, and impatience often lead to short-tempered outbursts that end relationships that could have been meaning-making. It could be interpreted actually as fear, vulnerability, and often low self-esteem, but there's no time or insight to reach out for help. A facade of being tough is constructed around them. The patient seek for help mostly because of their sleeplessness, drug abuse of recreational drugs like cocaine, crack cocaine, speed, Ritalin, often in the combination with a downer like alcohol, benzodiazepine, and painkillers. Persisting tension in the body occurs that no painkiller or massage might relieve. The patient often shows signs of hyperactivity, restlessness, and tend to participate in risky behavior like risky sport, risky sexual practices, or dangerous driving. At Society of Friends Berlin, an increased number of recurring and often complicated physical injuries was seen in these individuals as they mentioned, "I thought I am indestructible." Patient D, 2019. It is a dangerous and edgy path they're on, just as tense as walking on a tightrope. It is the victim's solution of dealing with a traumatic experience by fighting it on a constant base. Symptoms like sleeplessness and overdosing barbiturates, downers, or upper drugs like cocaine and Ritalin speed are a denial of the body's urges for proper rest, leaving exhaustion and the feeling of losing power and control behind. This feeling of loss of power and control can lead to spontaneous decisions to commit even suicide. Therefore, all stimulating treatments should be avoided, even though the patient might complain about the lack of power and the increasing exhaustion. The victim might move on to stage 3 if they cannot find proper treatment or rest. Stage 3, the dissociation and denial, kapha dominated. This stage is reigned by kapha dosha and can show signs of worsening to the physical and psychological quality of dhammas. This phase is characterized by dissociation and denial. The body feels numb. Physical activity cannot be performed through either mental inhibition or physical exhaustion. Victims often report that they do not allow themselves to perform sports or any joyful activity like participating in dance or social activities. They often suffer from compulsive behavior disorder that do not allow them to leave the house. Financial problems often increase and become threatening to health and social living. The patients do not open their mail, answer their mails, and bills are not paid. Their health is decreasing due to a lack of interest in any physical activity and cleanliness. Lack of spiritual belief, hope, a loss of meaning are the critical emotional responses and could even lead to life-threatening behavior. A person who has lost contact and hope has lost meaning in life. Life turns into a dull, vegetative process in which security is the major goal. Because the absence of global meaning left the patient in an insecure mental state where they feel surrounded by optional threats. These threats can become highly toxic as they are often the results of false meaning. Park, a psychologist, proposed that an important distinction is between the effort to find a meaning, meaning-making efforts, versus arriving at a meaning, meaning-made. On the one hand, it appears that a persistent search for meaning is typically associated with considerable burst adjustments to a PTSD, likely because it reflects a continued anxious preoccupation with the event. On the other hand, initial evidence does suggest that meaning made, that is, arriving at some cognitive resolution of the event, is associated with favorable effects on adjustment following PTSD, likely because it allows the person to integrate the experience and move on from it. It is important to carefully introduce valid meaning making through positive physical and emotional experiences. Focusing on negative meaning like conspiracy theories will continue in reproducing unreasonable fears. Stage 4, helplessness and immobility, kapha and tamas. If the patient has not yet received any proper psychological or psychiatric intervention or any other care and possible change in lifestyle, food and nutrition, as well in their social environment, they most likely will be experiencing stage 4, characterized by hopelessness and helplessness. Those patients are usually not seen by complementary medical personnel, instead will be most likely hospitalized or living in a care home. Symptoms are recurring signs of partial or total amnesia, make communication difficult. Constant tiredness, lack of concentration and willpower, lack of interest in social activities, physical inactivity, hoarding of items or garbage or other symptoms occur. The victim is living a self-isolated life in despair. Patients and relatives express this as a feeling of being dead while being alive. Some of them end up becoming homeless, and social and financial deprivation are mostly unavoidable. An inadequate diet reflects a lack of understanding, lack of self-care. It unfortunately also often reflects unsupportive life circumstances that do not allow or guarantee proper nutrition. Patients surviving natural disasters, escaping war, or being poor normally do not have access to clean water, good and healthy food, and find enough sleep. One has to take this in consideration when treating patients with diverse backgrounds. Choice is a luxury for most people. Fast food consumption is quick and easy, but creates armor and supports inflammatory processes in the body and the brain. As depression is now defined as inflammatory destruction in the brain, wrong food choices, slow digestion, and lack of mobility contribute to this state of depression. Classification and description of the stages in trauma experience. Not all the above changes in the personality and their possible lifestyle described for each stage might take place in the patient. It is not an inevitable way towards the worst and hopeless state. Sometimes, only very few changes of behavior are seen after intervention. Some changes and adaptations can be perfectly or unconsciously hidden, and even an experienced therapist might have difficulties in noticing them. Sometimes the person themselves is not aware of the complications due to the traumatic event. They have never experienced anything different. Sometimes there might be even additional symptoms observed. This above layout is merely a trial in order to help practitioners to deal more efficiently and compassionately with traumatized patients. If the diagnosed trauma, or better, PTSD, is used to classify a range of disorders, there should be handy solutions and classifications for treatment that could meet the individual demand of each patient and their particular and unique history. Additional to the Ayurvedic diagnosis and treatment, yoga therapy offers practical guidelines. Pranayama, for instance, turned out to be an effective tool to modify stress-related patterns like anxiety, panic, or sleeplessness. Erratic breathing patterns, for instance, are often unknown to the patient, but should be an important part in the diagnosis and treatment of PTSD. Another example could be the development of compulsive behavior disorder. The extreme urge to control can be so well established in the person's daily routine that the patient does not take any notice of it, and they often think it is just a habit. Seeger and Park say, what seems like a trauma to the rest of the world gets a broad shrug, and what seems like a minor hassle consumes enormous psychological energy and generates significant distress. One explanation is that the trauma has created heightened vulnerability to daily hassles. Other explanations exist as well, but regardless which explanation holds the greatest appeal, it is clear that people's reaction to traumatic events are not homogeneous and often unpredictable. Gut brain, heart brain, and skin brain apart from the brain. Ayurveda considers the heart, gut, and also skin as centers where mind is very active. Therefore, the gut, heart, and skin can influence the mind. Ayurveda uses this principle to influence the mind through specific treatments from Ram Manohar 2019. In fact, it was observed patients with a background of addiction, mostly pitta, seem to be more likely to accept and integrate new routines and rituals than those patients who had fallen out of any daily routine. Thank you very much.